Hi guys, this is Yash. Welcome to today's video. In this video, we are going to build a smart contract for FIR, which stands for First Information Report. This is a police complaint portal. As the title says, there is a lot of corruption that we can see in this genre, and that is why blockchain might be a solution to this problem. Now, without wasting further time, let's get into our development. We are going to use Third Web for our project, even for the smart contract development and also for our front end. In this specific video, we are only going to focus on the smart contract side of it. In the next one, we will be building the front end for the same. So as you can see, this is the command to get started. Press Y. Now it will take some time. We can name the project as Complaint Smart Contract. You can name it whatever you want to. And we are going to go ahead with hard hat and an empty project. Let's give it some time.
A few moments later.
Alright, so we are done with the setup. Let's cd into our folder and open this up in VS Code or whichever is your preferred code editor. Yes. Let's get rid of this and this as well. So let's see what has Third Web given us. A simple contract. Okay, let's change this to MIT. So the first two lines are basically the same. Let's change the contract name to complaint. Now we will be needing the constructor, but first let's start with what are the variables that we will be requiring. There will obviously be an owner and there will be a police officer who interacts with whatever complaints that are being registered. So let's start with that. Let's add an address which will be public and let's call it an officer. We will also have an address which will again be public and owner. We will also need an ID to track the complaints, so we will call it public and next ID. We will also need something that tells us which are the complaints that are still pending, which complaints are still to be solved and which are already solved. So we'll have three arrays. First one will be public pending approvals, let's call it, and second one can be pending resolutions and the third one can be resolved cases. So this takes care of our variables. If there is anything else, we'll add it later on. Now let's declare who will be the owner. Owner address is going to be obviously whoever deploys this contract. So that can be stated like this: owner is equal to mhd.sender. We will also need an officer address that can be passed into the constructor as an argument. So we'll call it officer_officer, Control C, and address, paste here. So we'll get the officer address. While deploying, we'll set an officer address, and we also need to have a next ID, which is going to be 1, since the proposal or the complaint will start with ID 1. The first complaint is going to be 1, and then we will increment the ID as new complaints come in. Next, we will need 2 modifiers, as we have 2 addresses, 2 roles. So the first one is going to be a modifier of only owner, and we will have to give a require statement which says msg.sender, that is, whoever is going to call the function should be the owner address. If not, then say that you are not the owner of this smart contract. Okay, and then run rest of the code. Then we need to have another modifier which says only officer, and this needs to be officer address, and the error is going to be you are not the officer of this smart contract. So next we are going to add a struct of complaint. All the details, all the data of complaint will be stored in this struct format. So firstly we need to have an ID. Let's call it ID simply. Then we can have an address of complaint registered by, who has registered the complaint. Then we can have, okay, so why is this giving error? Okay, spelling is wrong. We can have a string title. What is the title of the complaint? We can have a small little description. Next we will have a string of the approval remark that the officer will be giving. We can also have a resolution remark. Approval remark comes after the complaint is approved as a correct complaint and police are going to work on that. If there is a spam complaint, then police have to mention why they are declining. So the remark will help in this. We also have resolution remark. This will be given after the case is solved. And we need to have 2 booleans for the same, as is approved. And we also need to have a boolean called is resolved. And lastly, we also need to have a boolean which says if the complaint exists or not. So this is pretty much about the struct. We need to have a mapping to access the struct using UN256 to a complaint, which will be public. Let's call it complaints. After the mapping, let's have something to file a complaint. We'll need a function. So let's call this function file complaint. This function will take 2 arguments. One will be string memory underscore title, and we'll also need a string memory underscore description. This is going to be a public, and let's store this complaint storage new complaint into new complaint, and this will be a complaint of ID next ID. So there are some warnings. I think it is because we have not used the arguments. Let's go ahead and start adding new complaint, which is what we have stored it in. New complaint dot ID, since we have ID over here, is going to be next ID. So the first complaint will be 1 as we have added in the constructor. Then we will have, let's copy this because it's going to be a lot. The new complaint dot complaint registered by is going to be whoever is calling this function, take his address. Then we will be having the title, which is going to be the argument underscore title. Then we have description, which will be underscore description. Next is going to be the approval remark, which will be, since this is on the stage of filing, it is not yet approved, so we'll call it pending approval. Next we can have the resolution remark. We can call this as pending resolution. Then the booleans is approved will be false. Then we have is resolved, which is again going to be false, and then we will be having exists, which is going to be true because the complaint is just now filed. After all this, we also need to increase the next ID. So this is how we do it, and what I think is we also need to have an event. We need to emit an event over here. So let's create an event first. Let's call it complaint filed, and the arguments will be uint256. We will give it an ID. We will also have address of complaint. Just copy from here, paste it here, and we will need to have the title. So this is going to be the event, and let's emit it over here. Emit complaint filed. ID is going to be next ID. This is complaint registered by is going to be msg.sender, and the title is going to be underscore title. Our file complaint looks complete. Let's move ahead. Let's create a function for the officer to approve this complaint. Function approve complaint. It will have arguments of ID, So which complaint is to be approved, we will be needing the ID, and we also have to give a remark as an officer, so that will be a string approval remark. This is again going to be public, and the modifier is going to be only officer. Next, we need to add some require statements, some checks before that. So the first one is going to be complaints of the ID that is passed dot exists should be true. If it is not true, then this complaint ID does not exist. The ID should exist to run this approve complaint function. Next, we need to add one more require statement, which says complaint ID dot is approved should be false. And if it is not false, then complaint is already approved. So next, we need to access the complaint of the given ID dot is approved should turn into true, because now we are approving this complaint, and the remark is also to be set. We'll paste this again, and dot approval remark is going to be whatever is given in the argument. So this takes care of our approve complaint. Now if the admin feels, the officer feels that a certain complaint is a spam, it is just some random thing that someone has posted, he can decline. So let's create a function to decline the complaint. Let's call it decline complaint, and the function will be as follows. Similar to that, we need to have some require statements. First one is going to be the same, so add that over here. Second one will also be required. So is approved is false, and complaint is already approved. This looks good actually. We can go ahead. But the change that happens here is going to be complaint C capital complaints of the given ID dot exists will be turned into false because the complaint is declined, and we will also pass the message approval remark as dot approval remark. So what we will do here is we need to make sure that the user gets to know that his complaint has been declined. So we'll add a string which says this complaint is rejected, and the reason is going to be whatever is passed in the argument approval remark. An extra dot over here is causing some trouble. Alright, so decline complaint is also done. Next function, let's say if the case is solved and the officer has to give the resolution. Let's write a function for that. Let's call it resolve complaint. It will again take the same arguments. Instead of approval, it will take resolution remark, and it will be public and only officer can call it. Let's add the require statements. First one, second one. Let's copy it from here, paste it here. Even this will turn into true, because if the complaint is approved, then only can the officer solve the case and then give his resolution. So we make this true, and the third one is going to be is resolved, should be false. If this is not false, then we'll show a message saying complaint is already resolved. Next, we can go ahead and change complaints of the ID dot is resolved from false. This will turn to true because we are resolving, and we will also change the resolution remark from pending to whatever is being passed over here. Okay, so this takes care of the three main functions, or rather four main functions of our contract. Now we need to have some helper functions for our front end. So let's start with the first one, which is going to be function of calculating pending approval IDs. This is going to be a public function. Anyone can call this. We have an array which says pending approvals, so we'll be needing that. So we will have a for loop here. There will be I, and it won't start with 0 because our first ID is 1. We start with 1. Instead of array, let's call it next ID. It runs up to the next ID, and I++ is standard. Then we'll add an if statement to check if the complaints of I is approved is false. If it is not approved, then there is no point going ahead. And also we'll need one more, which says complaints of I dot exists should be true. If that is the case, then pending approvals dot push complaints of I dot ID. So if this is too much to understand, let's go through this again. We are running a for loop which starts with 1 because our first complaint ID is 1. Then this loop runs up to the next ID. How many next ID is basically however or how much complaints are totally registered up to now. So this is the for loop, and the condition that we are checking here is if the complaint of ID 1, 2, 3 as it is going to progress through the loop, this changes. So if the complaint is approved, then we don't need to add it to this because it is already approved, it is not pending. So we check if it is false. So that means that the complaint is still pending and the complaint should obviously exist. If that is the case, then we can add it to the pending approvals array. Now similar to this, we will create another function for calculating the pending resolution IDs. And this is going to be added to the array of pending resolutions. One more step over here is before we run this loop, we need to delete any elements that are there in the array, so that every time this function is run, the array is completely empty. So similar to that, we also need to delete the pending resolutions array over here. Next, it starts with ID 1 and goes up to next ID. And here we will be checking if is resolved is false. Then we'll also need is approved should be true, and exist should be true. If all these three conditions are completed or satisfied, then we push that ID into this array of pending resolutions. And the last one is resolved cases. So let's duplicate this. Let's call it calculate resolved IDs. We will delete the resolved cases first, and then we will only check if is resolved is true, and the rest need not be checked. If that is the case, then add it to the resolved cases. And lastly, we need to have a function which can set the officer address. We'll need to have an argument which sets the officer address. If in case we need to change the initially given officer address which we passed in the constructor, and this will be only owner can call this. It is simply going to set the owner address to whatever argument we pass over here, officer. So this is pretty much it for today's video. We will be building the front end of this smart contract in the next one. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed this, and if you want to stay notified about the next build, click on the bell icon as well. Thank you for watching today's video. This is Yash signing off. See you in the next one.